Wow.
Okay. So welcome everyone to what's going to be quite a unique sort of discussion on participation. I've invited a few members of the church to come and just discuss a few questions and share thoughts and suggestions about what participation might mean for us as a church, thinking about that value. So we're just going to go around and introduce each other in no particular order, but we'll do it the order on my screen anyway. So we'll start with Val. So if you want to just introduce yourself, Val.
Oh, hi everyone. Most of you know me as Val. I never get called Valerie unless somebody's really cross with me. But I'm married to John. We've been at Rayleigh Baptist Church probably for 30 plus years now when we actually look at it. I'm a mum. We've got 3 kids, 8 grandchildren. So that's us. We've been involved in church life in many areas over the years: marriage mentoring, life groups, with Sunday school and catering and all sorts. But I'm probably not the cleverest person, but I'm really willing to work.
No, that's great. And I don't think any of us are that clever. We've all got something to learn, so that's good. No, thanks, Val. And over to my right is Deanne.
Hi everyone, I'm Deanne. I don't know what to say about myself. Married to Mark, have 2 children, Jack and Rebecca. Jack's at uni in Exeter and Rebecca is in 6th form, in 17. I work part-time as a GP in Chelmsford, and I think that's probably what I can think of to say about myself.
That's fine, thank you. On my bottom left is Faith.
Hi, my name's Faith. I'm married to John and I have 2 children, Jake and Millie. Been a part of RBC for 13 years, almost 14 years now. And I'm part of the worship team. I'm on reception. I sometimes answer the phones. If you ring it, you might get me. Yeah, I just love being part of RBC and being able to be an active member in the worship team. I'm very creative. I'm a bit sort of way out there and quite expressive, I think some people say. Yeah.
Right, and last but not least is Isaac.
Hello everyone, I am Isaac. I am married to Jess and we have a son, Ezekiel, or Zeke. I am a teacher at Sheffield High School, which I've been there for 3 years, and both myself and Jess have been at Rayleigh Baptist Church for getting on to 3 years now, so that's 1 year pre-lockdown and then the rest since. Trying to think what else I can say. I guess in terms of church, we obviously started to serve, me helping out with the sound desk and the projector, Jess in terms of the music, and that's us really.
No, that's good. It's good to get to know you and be interesting to see where our discussion goes. So we're just going to start with an easy question just to get everything going, and that is basically, what does the word participation mean to you? When you hear that word, what does it suggest? It can be in general terms or specific to church. I don't mind. We'll start with Val. We'll just go around.
I was hoping you weren't going to do that, Stuart.
I wouldn't always start with you, Val. Okay.
Yeah, for me, participation means that I'm part of the body of the church, and that for me, participation is everybody involved across all the age groups, from the littlest to the oldest. It also means being an encourager. I think for me, it's actually seeing who I can encourage and where I can use any giftings that I have. Being willing, I think, probably is for me what participation is most about. Yeah, I'll probably leave it at there and let others speak, and we'll come in with anything else.
No, that's fine. I'm going with Deanne.
Yeah, I mean, Beth said loads, didn't she? I think it's getting involved. It's being active, not passive. It's a partnership. And I think it's working together at something, a shared vision and a shared responsibility, shared involvement, really doing it as a team.
Yeah.
Down to Faith.
Yeah, very similar. It's a doing word, isn't it? It's, as you say, Deanne, it's active, it's not passive. But within that, I think it's a choice. We have a choice in that, because it's a doing word. We have a choice to step forward and to participate. I sort of imagined a child's party, and by default you are a participant because of the invitation, and so you go, and so by default you are a participant. But then to be actively involved, you then have to choose to be part of the games. You have to choose to put yourself forward for those things. So yeah, so for me sometimes it's a doing word, and yes, it's a team thing, it's a team effort, but actually it's a choice that we can make.
Isaac?
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that's been said. I think for me, participation simply means taking part, and especially in church, but in all walks of life, you can take part to varying degrees. When you go to church, in theory, you're participating in the service, but as you guys have mentioned, we can easily be quite passive when we take part. We don't just sing the songs and move on. So I think as mentioned before, we need to be active in how we take part and keep thinking actively about how we can take part in the future, because, you know, God doesn't want passive Christians, he wants active Christians. So it's definitely important to think about how we can actually participate.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Very helpful answers, getting us to think about what that means. So in more specific church life, what does it mean then to participate together? Any ideas or thoughts upon that?
I suppose when thinking about participating together, you think about ministries that you could take part in. For instance, Faith obviously mentioned the worship. You know, I mentioned kind of the sound team. I guess thinking where you feel called towards, or where you can, you know, help towards, because the beauty of church, there's so many different ways you can serve and so many people you can serve with. So I guess in that sense, you inevitably build a community with people in whatever you are serving in.
I think it does rely on relationship, doesn't it? Because to participate with people you don't know is tricky, but to participate with friends isn't a hardship at all, is it? So a friend asks you to help with something, you know, and it's easy. We've just been volunteering at a vaccination centre in Chelmsford, and it's really interesting, the volunteers that all come together. So like all the Scout club leaders all came together, and it was very obvious that they all knew each other and there was a banter going on between them. If volunteers come and they don't know each other, it's very tricky sometimes.
That's interesting, yeah, because I put that to actively look for opportunities to seek out and to see people, not just to see someone you walk through the door, not to physically see with your eyes, but actually just to look that little bit further and to actually physically see people for who they are and the giftings that they have perhaps got. Because sometimes to know your own giftings can sometimes be hard, can't it? You don't always know your natural giftings, and other people can sometimes spot that in you much easier than you can yourself. And so to actively encourage yourself in the giftings that you know you do have, would also look to others to encourage you in those that perhaps you don't know you have. That can be really hard, because sometimes you're then relying on other people to sort of encourage you in that. But to be able to see people beyond the physical, and to look deeper, and that is relationship, isn't it, Deanne?
Yeah, I mean, there are really good role models in the Bible as well, aren't there, in terms of being encouragers. I think if you can encourage someone, that makes such a difference, particularly, as you say, Faith, in terms of their gifting, because often you can spot something that others don't directly see. And if you go up to someone quite unexpectedly and say, do you know what, I saw this in you today, that was wonderful, you have made their day and made them more willing to take a risk. Because I think for some people it's about risk taking as well. They're not comfortable in speaking out or saying anything. It means taking a risk, and that can really, encouragement means just so much.
And I think when you have that relationship, it's easier to participate, and it doesn't matter if you get it wrong. If it's,
Yeah.
you know, if it's participating with a friend and you think, I'm not really sure if I'm gifted to do that. They think I am, but actually it's all right if your heart's in the right place and you participate and you mess up.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think as a newish member of the church, I think Jess and I have felt very blessed by people, including yourselves in many ways, you know, encouraging us to participate, encouraging us to serve, and welcoming us. Because I guess for new members of the church or visitors, they might be thinking, okay, where do I fit in this? So to, as you said, to have that encouragement and that welcome that, hey, you know, we feel you're gifted in this, or haven't got to know people, you know, you feel, okay, we can maybe help with this. I think that does mean a great deal on both sides.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's obvious that intentionality of getting to know each other, and whether that be through life groups or just meeting together. I think that's one of the good things I found about the Zoom meetings we've been doing after church, is we've been going into breakout rooms with people we might not necessarily have spoken to or seen, and that's definitely helped me get to know people, different people than I would normally speak to or get to know. So we've spoken about worship a little bit, and I think when we talk about participation, we can easily get sucked into the idea it's just obedience and just doing what we need to do. So in terms of worship, we normally think of that as singing and just standing up and singing the words. I think participation in that is a lot more than that. But I wonder what your thoughts are about how we might participate better in worship and singing and other ways as well.
Yeah.
I guess from
sorry, go on.
No, go ahead, Faith. I guess as the creative worship lead, you take the lead on this.
Yeah, I think you really touched on it, Stu, when you said it's about not about duty. It's not about being obedient, and I think that's really key, because I think for me, participation comes from a state of heart, and if your covenant relationship with Jesus is such that you feel confident and you know who you are because you know Jesus intimately, then out of that there will be an outpouring of wanting to partake because you love him and because you love the people around you. And so it's not a sense of duty, it's a sense, and it's not even loyalty, it's a sense of just wanting to please the Father. And so I think there's it has to start with a heart response. I think for me personally, it's a heart response. I think some things we do because we know they need to be done, and there are jobs that do because we know they need to be done. But I think if we're talking about ministry areas, I think it's a responsive heart for me.
Yeah, I'd completely agree. And I think, like with anything these days, we can easily come to church and be quite passive and almost like customers and wait for the right environment to worship. You're waiting for the right song, or you're waiting for the right mood, or you're waiting for the right sermon to worship. When actually we need to come ready to worship, and we need to G ourselves up in many ways. So absolutely, that active desire to worship is very important. And I agree with you, Faith. It does genuinely come from the heart, because praising God should come from the heart. We need to make clear that we do love him. And I think that's where true, genuine worship, and you're right, Stuart, it doesn't just come from singing, it comes from obviously praying for our actions, and not being mindless in any way, but remember to realize who we're doing it for.
That word intentional again, isn't it?
Yeah.
And to worship in spite of and not because of. And when we talk about worship, often we think sort of music, that tends to be sort of a bit of a go-to, especially if you're a musical person. You think worship, I think singing, that's kind of the way I'm wired. But there are so many other facets to that, which I'm discovering under my new role, which is challenging. But I think not everybody is wired the same way. And I think it's understanding that, isn't it? And knowing that what works for me isn't going to work for the person sitting next to me. And you're right, Isaac, it starts with that expression. It's an outpouring when you come on a Sunday or a service, whatever day it is, you come to a meeting ready to bring, rather than ready to say, well, what are you going to give me? What can I take away from this? It's, well, what have I experienced in my personal walk with Jesus this week that I can bring to the body that's going to encourage and help and strengthen? And that can be just as simple as something as a conversation you had with your neighbour. It doesn't have to be big lights and flashing events. It just can be the normal, the everyday, and there can be something so encouraging in that. And I guess it's encouraging each other to share that, and have an environment where there's space to do that.
I think
testimony has a, sorry, Deanne.
No, go, you go.
I was just going to say, I think, you know, sort of personal testimony has a big part to play in worship. Just sort of saying where it is and how God has moved in your life that way. I think also we need, you know, in terms of worship, I think sometimes it's difficult to be comfortable in the silence as well. We need to be better sometimes, I think, at exploring just how being silent can be worship. It doesn't mean the silence is poverty stricken. It can be a very rich time, you know. It can be a time of that real personal communion with God. And I think sometimes we can get a bit nervous about silences and feel, oh, I must jump in and say something.
Yeah, it very much goes back to when Jesus calls out those who pray really loudly and sing really loudly and want to be noticed. Whereas actually he says, you know, we should kind of pray in quiet. So it's that sense of really that personal worship rather than trying to tick a box.
Yeah.
I think also, I mean, worship should be truthful, shouldn't it? And it kind of highlights a lot of what everyone said. So Faith, you were saying everyone worships differently because we're different people. And so if we all try to worship in the same way, we're not being truthful, because actually you can't try and, you know, if you're not that type of person and that's not how you worship, it's not worshipping in spirit and truth. So I'm quite excited to see how reset post-COVID and what worship looks like. It's a brilliant opportunity to allow us to do things differently, and how we all participate in worship and what that looks like for us beyond singing worship will be really interesting to see how that pans out. It's a brilliant opportunity to just try some things out. So that we can't go back to the old ways. We don't want to go back to the old ways, actually. This happened for a reason. And what does worship look like? What should the key elements of worship be? And how can we make that happen? Let's almost put down the old and start with something new and make sure it fulfills worship in spirit and truth.
Yeah.
Everyone participating. And actually, I'll get around to the answer in the question in a minute, which is how does it look like as corporate worship for us? Well, if you excite us, if we get excited by, well, that sounds interesting, that's a good way of doing it, I think people will participate, because it's an opportunity for people to go, yeah, that sounds brilliant, let's give that a go. That's not everyone's personality. I appreciate some people change is difficult, but for my personality, something exciting and new, a new way of engaging that will encourage us is a good thing.
Yeah.
So it is a different tact of participation, but what do we think or feel participation might look like in our neighbourhoods or away from the church building as it was? How do you think that looks like as a church participating together but not in the building? Is that possible?
Yeah, vital for us as a church to understand the need of our community, and harking back to the reset post-COVID, understanding the huge needs that are in our community that might look very different to what really looked like a year and a half ago. And some of those needs won't even be evident yet because they'll have been, you know, behind closed doors for 18 months or whatever. And just to understand the need, and to then kind of step out into it together and then be prepared to adapt as that need changes. And that again is something, when you know people, you can work together and participate together. And if people understand there's a need there, I think most of us at RBC would want to be there and help and get involved in that need.
Yeah. I think that again, it's what will happen when we start to participate out of our personal walk. When we start to participate together as a congregation, there will be an outpouring, a natural outpouring that will affect those people we come into contact during the week. So it's the intentionality of participating with each other, getting into relationship with each other within the church setting, which then allows us to get to know one another in a personal way and say, actually, we've got common interests, we've got things that we could do together, we've got a common theme where we feel that God is calling us to be active within our community, and so that will then have that knock-on effect outwardly.
Yeah. I think COVID has given us so many opportunities to be those people too, you know, with things like helping out at food banks or being aware of neighbours who are more challenged with being able to go out, whatever. That I think the doorway is more open now than perhaps it's ever been.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I guess participation in our neighbours is getting out of our homes, which obviously is something that we've rarely done over the last year or so. But it's something that even before lockdown, I certainly struggled with. And it makes me think about my time at university. Obviously, we just had our dorm rooms or, you know, our flats for the year, whatever. But because that was that central hub, you know, on campus, we would naturally go out. And I remember, I think that's probably the time I felt the most natural talking about my faith to non-Christians, because you just talked about stuff and I just talked about my faith, and I talked about the blessings of it and the challenges and how the two of them can be combined. And, you know, you're right in the sense of, much as we maybe talk about the weather and what we do during the day and whatever, we can talk about, you know, when we went to church and talk about what we studied at church, and talk about, you know, what we studied in our life groups, and just make that like a natural part of a conversation with our neighbours. I think that's what I certainly need to train myself to do, and I imagine quite a few of us need to do so.
Yeah. I found it really easy to talk to people even in the street because of COVID, that you can actually stop, you know, if you see a stranger who stops, say, how are you doing? And they're responsive. They're not thinking, oh, who's this person that's come up to me that is talking to me? That I think that the potential is so great now. There's never been a better time. And I think as well, it's all about being genuine. If you're talking to people, you know, just really making sure they know that you're really interested in them, what's happening in their life. You're not doing it as a condition. You know, once you put conditionality into something, then you're not being really genuine with people that need that lift.
Yeah, like we said already, it's about what you said earlier, Val, about encouraging each other to do these things, have these conversations, look for needs and identify them as a community ourselves, what we do as a church to look at food banks and whatever needs, big needs come out of COVID, but also where we are, where we live, the neighborhoods, and just, you know, seeking out where we can serve and meet others. But as a group, we've got responsibility to encourage each other, and and again, you'll hear testimony, share how God's been working. You know, not as a tick box exercise, but as a exciting, look what God can do when we just open up ourselves to Him. So this is could be a bit of an interesting question, but in terms of equality, how do you think that plays a part in participation, and what are the challenges that we might have as a church and a community in facing such issues such as equality and how we work?
I feel for me, maybe a big challenge is making sure everyone has an opportunity to participate, but encouraging them, calling them towards the right calling for them into participating. Because a quite arbitrary example is, for instance, only some of us, not me, might be gifted to help with sort of musical worship. However, there might be, what if I really, really want to do it? How do you deal with that in a way that blesses the church, but, blesses everyone involved? So it's that sense of, on the one hand, how do you give us opportunities? What was that, Deanne?
We put you on mute.
Yeah. Good
We'll give
move.
you a tambourine. We've got some tambourine.
Get a triangle. Yes, but that's a really interesting point, because the fear you might have is that there might be some situations where you give them like a token role to appease them, when it's not really blessing anyone. So I think, as we mentioned earlier, it's those genuine conversations where you trust the people that you're talking to. If they feel that you might be called towards this and you didn't think about it because you trust that person, because you prayed about it yourself, you think, I might do that. So it's about, I guess, an openness of opportunity, but knowing that we're not all called to do the exact same thing. We're not all called to, lead prayer groups or life groups or preach. I think in my previous church, we talked about Bible sharers. We don't have to be Bible teachers or preachers, but we can still share God's word in whatever way that we can. So I guess having that openness, but also really guiding us towards what God is kind of calling us to do. I think that's a challenge, certainly.
Yeah. You read my notes, Isaac. Pretty much exactly what I had down. We aren't all cut out for the same thing. As we've already said, we're given natural giftings that we will naturally excel at because it's what's placed in us. But also, I think equality in that there should be no judgment for. Sometimes we can, particularly when we're heavily involved in things, we can look at, well, why can't they make that? Why can't they make this meeting? Why can't they do that? And sometimes life just throws stuff at you where you can't participate, perhaps to the level that you would want to. There might be family issues, work issues, things that prevent you that you would perhaps like to. And for that not to be an issue, because we can all take part, as you said, Isaac, I've got everyone here, but everyone can participate in the being and the sharing. God speaks to everybody, in the big stuff and the little stuff. So even sharing that on a Sunday or in a life group or whenever that might be, that's participation. Even if you can't make the weekly meetings and the other things, small children, Isaac, you're looking on that, small children can sometimes prevent you from getting out and being able to go places, and that can feel, for me, I'm very much a doer, and sometimes I feel limited. I can't go because I've got to be in with my kids, and I sometimes find that really frustrating because I'd want to commit to anything and everything that was sort of coming my way, which also isn't the right thing. But yeah, so no judgment on the level of participation, I think, is really important. That people don't feel there's a condemnation if you're not serving tea every week or part of the worship team, or if you feel unable to be able to have the permission to say, actually, right now in my walk and my journey, I just can't, but I can do this. And for us to then encourage them in that, find out what this is, and encourage them in that. For that reason.
I mean, in my notes, I put down really that everyone equipped and that they would know their gifts, because I think that quite often people don't really know what their gifts in. I think it was you, Faye, said that you know, sometimes it takes someone else to point out what your gifts are. But I do think as well that that we need to create an environment where people feel free and that they won't be judged if they make a mess of it, a second-class culture, if you like, or a next, you know, a second chance, that because you did it wrong doesn't necessarily mean it wasn't right. It just means that you're learning. And I just feel it's really important that people really understand, every single one of us understand how incredibly valuable we are to church. Every single one of us should be there. Every single one of us makes the body whole. If one of us is missing, the church isn't complete. For, you know, it is just that intense valuation of each person. One of the things that I put down, actually, you know, just sort of talking about people being included as well, was about some of our older folk, of which I have suddenly become one. But outside of that, I was thinking, how many of our old people spend, you know, hours because of carers coming in, getting ready to go to church. And on top of that, then they sit on the minibus for a long time. They are probably more ready for church than so many of us, and are participating in a way sometimes we don't always see, because they're just sitting sometimes at the back of the church on their own. Every single person, particularly I have a real thing in terms of equipping about having kids more involved. It's a real issue with me personally. I want to see the children so much more active in our church life. They're church of today, not tomorrow. I don't know if that's helpful with people.
No, it's all helpful, and it's a direction God's leading the church in. A lot of things we said today, and thought about, it's where we're thinking, you know, about making space in the service for testimony and more. We label it creative worship. I don't know what the actual label is, but it's that participation where it's not just about singing. You know, it's about people giving, you know, having a word or just reading passages from the Bible that they feel like, and as well as many other things, which thankfully I'm not investigating, but that's why we've given Faith the role that we've given her, because she is creative and can help involve people in worship that's not just singing. And it's a balance, isn't it? Because, you know, I can't speak for Isaac, but if you put me in a microphone and ask me to sing, it wouldn't take you long to realize that's not my gifting, and it probably wouldn't matter how many hours of training I had. You know, and we've got to recognize that and help people find their calling and their gifting, and help them use it and encourage it. But likewise, as people are exploring gifts, you know, exactly you said about, it's giving them the chance to do that without regret or judgment, you know, that we love on them, and we don't condemn them because they've stood up and made a mistake. So speak about that. In what ways do you think we can practically encourage and enable everyone to find their gifting, and the phrase we use is every member ministry, so equipping every member of the church to be involved in something. So how do you think we could practically see that work, and what ways can we make it better, do you think?
It's a biggie, isn't it? Because I think sometimes we all have our own ideas of how we'd like to see things be and how we'd like to see things work. And I guess that starting point for me would be that we lay aside any personal agenda and actually seek God in everything, which I think we're really good at. But there are still moments personally, and I think we all struggle with it. Oh, wouldn't it be great if we were doing this or we were doing that? And actually, that might not be what it is that God is calling us to in this season. So to be constantly seeking and encountering the Spirit in personal corporate worship and devotional times, And then out of that, to then be able to start looking. So I guess the vision is really important, isn't it? Having a vision of knowing where we're going,
Yeah.
and then enabling each other to get there. And we've said it so many times already this evening, but to see the best and sometimes look for the hidden in people. So we encourage that always. And if you're a doer, and I'm guilty of this, I'm a doer, and to allow space for others to do, because often doers will just get on and do, and will always volunteer and always be the one that will step forward, when actually that then doesn't leave space for other people to stand in that gap. And so as a doer, I'm always challenged to take that step back, to see the good and the best in others, and to spot the hidden gifts, and to facilitate and enable those. And so I find that really hard. It's not something that comes easy to me. I find that a challenge. But yeah, so to make space to allow others to do, I think is really important for us doers.
And I think that's key in a church of certain sizes, where we will have more than one person gifted in more than one or in the same thing. So it's important that we do allow that and explore that, and it can be difficult, but it's a sacrifice we have to make to allow others to exercise their gifts, is to step back sometimes, and it's a challenge.
I think Val touched on it as well. You talked about valuing people, and when people feel valued, they might want to participate more. And I think it's kind of, I think sometimes I've been guilty of, you have something that you want to do, and you need some participants to help you on the journey, and you look around and you pick some people and And we can be those people sometimes that Faith alluded to, so we can look and go, well, why aren't they involved and why aren't they participating? And it's going back to truthfulness and honesty and being authentic and all those other things that we throw around. But it's really important to understand and have good relationships with each other, so that we can understand, oh, Stuart, why are you not involved in that? Because, right, so there's some things in the past that make sense of that. And not that we want to go over the past, but sometimes those past things have hurt people and affected why they won't now participate in something else. And we can just choose to ignore that because we don't like healthy conflict as Christians, and it's easier to ignore than it is to talk about, a bit uncomfortable, to allow that healing to take place and gently nurture that person to make mistakes. They're not the finished article, but actually love them enough to allow them to participate again with loads of encouragement, as we've already mentioned as well, so that they can participate again. And I just wonder sometimes whether we have people, and we've maybe all been there, where we're a bit fearful to participate again because of previous hurts and things that maybe didn't get resolved. And actually that honesty, truthfulness, to understand that, to revalue that person, to recognise their role again, and to then say, look, you can be actively engaged and actually have maybe a bit of a say in how that ministry shapes as well, because sometimes I think we can hand someone something, but it's a package and there's not much scope to change it. And actually that's participation with some very clear boundaries and not much authority to do anything differently. So I think to encourage and to value that person, to allow them some scope to how that looks, how that shapes out, to understand where they've come from and their history. Does that make sense?
No, it does. I think it all comes, like you said at the start, it comes down to those relationships. And I think it's something we've got to work together on as a leadership and as a church. Through whatever medium, whether it be life groups or whatever, or just getting in touch, just having those conversations and trying to resolve issues, because they do cloud, and especially when ministries or people want to get involved in something that other people used to run and do, and it's about making sure that we honour the past and recognise what's gone on so we can learn from it. But it's again, it comes down to that authenticity of people being able to be honest. And if we can't be honest with each other, then we're not going to get true participation, because it's either going to be resented or by people who want to do it but don't feel valued to do it. And it's not going to be where we want it to be. So we need to look at that.
And I think this might be slightly off the topic a little bit, but that participation, maybe in churches, we're a bit, we don't allow people to lay things down either very easily. So, you know, I don't know, take on Rolex, and 10 years down the line, you're still doing Rolex, and it becomes less of participation and more of duty, less of active excitement about a vision and participating in God's plan, and more of it's Monday night again or Tuesday night again, and just that feeling. And that's not a failure to go, you know what, it's a strength to say, actually, now's not the time, as Faith was saying, now's the time to say no to something, now's the time to lay something down as well, and without any guilt, just a real assurance of your where you're at, and that's the right decision for you.
And that confidence, I think, Deanne, comes out of that relationship with Jesus, knowing whose you are, isn't it? It's understanding that, as individuals and human beings, we will always feel like we can form opinions about us, and we form opinions about others. That's human nature, isn't it? It seems to be the way that we tend to default, and we're wired to. But to be able to give people that space and allow that, I think, as you say, it's so key, so important. And I've had to do that. I think there have been times when my kids have been very small, and I've been going through some rough stuff, and I've been thinking, no, actually, you know what, I can't squeeze it all in. I mean, you feel bad for that, don't you? Think, oh, I can't not do that. I'm letting people down. Actually, no, there has to be that time when you have to say, actually, now's not that time, and that's okay. As you say, it's okay.
And I genuinely, Faith, would view that as a strength. I would look at you if you said that, and I would think, what a wise thing to do. No one else looks from afar and goes, Faith, you're winging it again. You know, you don't, do you? But we think that, and yet actually, I guess all of us would look and go, that was real wisdom there to lay that down. And wow, look, someone else took that on because they saw a need, and they had an opportunity to fulfill that role in their own way as well. And that's that whole giving them capacity to do with some stretched boundaries of how that can look. And it doesn't have to be a Faith number 2 stepping into Faith's shoes. It can be a Deanne doing it in a different way, or whatever, and that's okay as well, isn't it?
Yeah really important.
Well, I'm just going to ask one last question to finish off, unless there's anything anyone wants to add, which is just about, is there a story from the Bible or a passage that speaks to you about participation, and what we can learn from it? And if you all talk about 1 Corinthians 12, then that's fine. So I don't know if someone wants to go first before someone else steals that Bible verse.
I had a bit of an obscure one, to be honest.
Okay.
It just, when I first read that question, it was what first came to mind. Ruth, the story of Ruth, and I think it just, when I sort of read through specific verses, like chapter 1, verse 16 to 18, it's that bit where she has that conversation with Naomi about leaving her home and going with her, and Naomi is really adamant that actually that they shouldn't come, they should stay, and she can't give them anything. She's, you know, they don't owe her anything. She's happy for them to stay, she's happy to move on herself, and there really is, she discharges any kind of responsibility of having to go with her. But in that, Ruth chooses to participate in a new life. She chooses to go forward and to start something new with Naomi, and she leaves Moab, and she goes with her mother-in-law. And so her choice wasn't from duty, it wasn't out of misplaced loyalty, it was out of love. And out of that, because she chose to participate in a new life and she got stuck in where she was, And in chapter 2, verse 2, she ends up in the fields, gleaning behind the workers in the field. And because of that, Boaz noticed her. And out of that, we know the rest of the story. So it's history, as they say. It's because of that, because of her willingness to participate in something new, to go somewhere new, she made new roots, which produced fresh new things, which then brought fruit. And then the genealogy of Jesus then follows. And so for her, that was a real blessing to leave such devastation where she was, to choose to participate in something that she didn't know. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't know who she would be with other than being with Naomi. And she chose to get stuck in and do and be active. And because of that, God blessed her. So that was my...
Yeah. I would say for me it was Romans 12, actually, not Corinthians 12, Stuart, but it was, let love be genuine, love one another with brotherly affection, outdo one another in showing honor. And for me, that just sort of encapsulates everything that we're trying to achieve with each other. And I think for me, the culture change, that it doesn't apply to everyone, but it may apply to some, is, do we go to church or do we belong to church? I think that's a huge shift for some people in terms of participation. That's just me.
Brilliant, thank you.
See, the ones that sprung to mind for me were much more about us not being asked to participate when we're the finished article, that actually God chooses us. He chose disciples who were young, rough fishermen with very little in terms of biblical training, and yet they became the 12 disciples. And the one that I always love is the Zacchaeus story, because I'm short. And Zacchaeus was a sinner and a tax collector, and he was terrified up a tree, and yet just by Jesus saying, can I come round for dinner, or can I come to your house for tea, as the song goes, he then participated. He said, yeah, come in, welcomed Jesus in, and because of that, his life was transformed. And I think not waiting till we're the finished article, because we'll never get there, and realizing that actually those we're working with are not the finished article either, and we all mess up and we all going to annoy each other, but that's all okay. Let's have some healthy conflict, let's sort it out in love, and then let's work together, recognizing that Jesus worked with a tax collector and some rough and ready fishermen, and it was still okay. So you know what, we're all sinners, and it's okay, because we can participate in this amazing honor that we have to help bring the kingdom of God here in Rayleigh. And yet look at us, we're rough and ready too, but it's okay.
That's really helpful.
And I agree with all those stories. I mean, I don't mean to throw a curveball and put a down on things, but for whatever reason, I've kept thinking of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, which is kind of the opposite of participation, where he is clearly at his most troubled, and he requests and he asks his friends, his disciples, to pray with him. And not once, not twice, but I think three times, they failed to do so. And that phrase, really stands out to me: the spirit is willing, but the body is weak. How often do we think, oh, it would be good to do this, but we can't be bothered, frankly. And we think of excuse after excuse after excuse. We can't be bothered, really. So I guess what I need to think about, I imagine what a lot of us need to think about, is how can we strengthen our bodies? How can we strengthen ourselves to really follow our spirit? Is our spirit willing in the first place? We have to ask ourselves some maybe tough questions. And we should be grateful for the people around us. And that's been a running theme of this conversation, the people around us encouraging us. And therefore we need to be encouraging the people around us as well, in terms of how can we strengthen each other? How can we strengthen ourselves to be as willing as possible and to follow through with that willingness and not be asleep when Jesus needs us?
Yeah,
that's true.
No, all great examples of participation and the calling that we have to to get stuck into what God is doing, and it's not going to happen if we just sit down and expect it. We've got to get up, intentionally look for it in each other, and support and encourage each other. That's been a very helpful conversation. Is there anything people feel they want to share that I haven't asked, or something they want to?
No.
That's fine. Well, I'm just going to pray first. Thank you, and then I'll stop the recording and we can just chat for a bit. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, just thank you for this time for us to gather together and discuss participation. And it's clear, Lord, that there's commonality in thought and suggestion and direction of what that means as individuals and as a church. So just ask, Lord, that you help us as we watch this recording and think about it, that you just help us to think and understand about what participation means for us. Help us build those relationships that are so vital in working together to serve your kingdom. Those relationships which are key to identifying each other's gifts and encouraging each other, and whether it be in church services or in life groups or just in friendships at the church, Lord, that you help us to know each other better, to spend that time and to put in that effort, to get to know people, and not just people we know, but new people we won't speak to, people we won't necessarily get involved with. Help us to do that. And if there's situations, Lord, from the past where we've not been encouraging, or things have happened, Lord, that shouldn't have happened, Lord, I just ask for forgiveness, and that you help us to resolve those soured relationships. Help us to identify and fix them, Lord, because that will just be a barrier in you doing what you need to do in our church. So I just ask, Lord, that you help us to seek you as a church, to look to where you're taking us, and to get involved, Lord, and whether that be serving tea and coffee at a service, or whether it be standing on a street corner blasting out your gospel, whatever it be, Lord, that you help us, help us to be your body, help us to encourage each other, be with each other, love each other, and just be your church, Lord. Not a building we come to, but a body of people who fellowship and journey together. This we ask in your Son's name. Amen.
Amen. Amen.